Well, good Friday morning to everyone. Thank you for attending the last session of our Soil Health Week. Today we will be focusing on cover crops, and the order of the day will be we have a short presentation, and then we will open up and continue the discussion if you would like. So that time will be for anyone that has any questions, and we'll be focusing on cover crops. So our speaker today is Garrett Schaeffer. Gared came to Extension in 2016. He is a weeds field specialist. His office is at the Aberdeen Regional Center. And so we're happy to have Gared on our team, and I think we're ready for him to take it away. Yep, we can hear you, and I'm seeing the PowerPoint very well.
Very good. All right, awesome. Well, then Anthony was saying, I'm Garrett Schaeffer. So last few years, there's been a lot of interest in cover crops, especially in South Dakota. It's increased a lot last years since I started working here about 5 years ago. And of course, one component of that is how cover crops engage with growing, with herbicides, how they engage with growing cover crops. And all the dynamics there. It's very complicated. It's not a straightforward answer usually, but I did do some research after. So we're trying to see the effects of long residual herbicides that we know of, problems that could occur after wheat. So cover crops growing after wheat and also after corn silage, because those are two easy opportunities to integrate cover crops into your system, especially after small grain, but after corn silage as well can be an option. So starting out, yesterday we had a few questions on labels and then when I can graze, when I can't graze. So I have talked about this previously, so I'll just kind of mention it and we can talk about this after the presentation as well. But just mentioning this, so in general, if you're gonna graze it, then yes, you have to follow any rotational or plant back restrictions listed on the label. You have to follow that. And now, if the label doesn't say that, there's nothing on the label about grazing, haying, nothing like that, I would suggest contacting the manufacturer or the chemical rep, or maybe where you bought it from, because sometimes that means there are still restrictions, they just don't mention it. Sometimes there aren't restrictions, they're just not mentioning that. So labels are getting better as the years go on, but sometimes the labels aren't super clear on that. Just for example, I'll give some examples. I'm not promoting any of these chemicals. I'm just giving you examples. So on Residual, it says do not graze or harvest rotational or cover crops for food or animal feed for 18 months following the last application of Residual. So if you planned within that time frame, then you couldn't do it. But if you waited 18 months, then whatever you do, you can. Sometimes, especially in wheat, they don't let you, some less residual herbicides, they won't let you graze or harvest the crop that's been sprayed on. But if you plant something after harvest, you're fine. Then like Acuron says, after harvest, the planting of a cover crop is allowed to provided the cover crop is not grazed or fed to livestock nor harvested for food. So that one's very specific. Acuron, of course, is a mixture of, I think, 4 different chemicals. So it depends on, of course, the chemicals sprayed, etc. Or like a wheat herbicide, Vero says the label says planting cover crops in fields treated with Vero herbicide is allowed as long as these cover crops are not grazed by livestock or harvested for food. So they're very specific. Bayer is one I've noticed. Some other companies also do it, but Bayer is one I know that's very clear on their labels. A lot of them, if you can graze, not graze, restrictions, no restrictions, etc. Also, so some of these, I think Glean is one of them. They require you to do a field bioassay before you even plant a cover crop. You can do it, but it might be a requirement to do a cover crop after these herbicides been sprayed in crop, and then you want to plant a cover crop after that cash crop. So again, one option of doing this is just plant some strips here and there throughout the field. But to do that, it's going to take time, and usually in South Dakota, we don't have a lot of time. So I would suggest doing the small scale bioassay, which is just getting a soil sample together from different areas of the field, field entrances, field edges, turnaround areas where you sprayed, eroded hills, maybe extreme pH areas you know of, low areas, and kind of mix it together and put it in a flower pot or whatever with some soil next to it that's from similar soil type and everything in the field you know it hasn't been sprayed, potentially if you can find that, or just get some potting soil that you know it's not contaminated if you don't have the other option. And then within a week, you should be able to see effects of whatever cover crop you planted in there from that. So in general, that's some quick way of finding out. But if you don't, of course, if you don't personally care, I've known other people that just go in and drill it anyways and see what happens. So it kind of depends, I guess, on your goals of what you want to happen or not happen. So going into research, so again, like I said, I've been a few years of looking at herbicide effects, residual effects on cover crops. The first one we did, one of them we did was looking at cover crops planted after wheat, spring and winter. We did 20 residual herbicides applied, of course, post, over top, wheat, on label, full rate. Most of those were applied in May. There's a few locations we had to do early June, like the first week, but it was pretty much early June or May. They were applied on crop, on label, full rate. And then we came in after harvest, wheat harvest, and drilled in cover crops. So there's 4 locations. We had 3 at research farms, and then 1 at a local producer's place, north central South Dakota. So 2 of these locations were central South Dakota, 1 north and south, and then east, north and south at research farms. And we had quite a few plots there in those. So this is a picture of actually Anthony Bly there, one of our hosts. Did some drilling for me, drilled the cover crops in after wheat harvest. And the Southeast Research Farm here, as it looks like. So you're looking west here in this picture. I sprayed north-south on every rep. This was, there's 4 replications here. And then that's the cover crops that looked later in the season, what they look like. So wheat herbicides of least concern in general, if you apply these on label on top of a cash crop of small grain like wheat. Some of these, of course, are not wheat herbicides. Some are. So 2,4-D amine, ester, clarity, starane, voucher, stinger, stuff like this. You're not going to have an issue with cover crops after the cash crop is harvested if you don't do a burn down. This is just looking at residual problems after the cash crop. Buck drill, aim. So I did put in Tacoma, Axle, Discover. Those are grass herbicides. I did look at those just because I wanted to see if there's any issues with grasses, cover crops planted after the cash crop. And we did see some effects on some of these, the grass herbicides, but those other broadleaf herbicides we didn't see. I didn't look at on this situation just because I know from other research that it's not going to be a big issue. And you can get these at the documents at online at the SDSU Extension's website. You can download them. So I'm just going to look at a few herbicides, kind of touch on them, and we can kind of talk about after this other issues. So looking first at so I looked at Axle, Husky, Outrider, Avero. Again, I'm not promoting these. There's just some of the chemicals we looked at. These are all different group numbers, different sites of action here. So Axle is a grass herbicide, group 1. In general, microbial decomposition is high. Risk of carryover is greatest for grasses. So as you can see here, this is highest percent loss. So these numbers, that's the highest percent loss that we had on cover crop stands versus the control, which had no herbicide applied, but it was kept weed free by hand. So those were clean plots. So we saw, for example, in high moisture situations, and high moisture would have been 12.5 to 14.5 inches of precipitation between application of herbicide to cover crop planting. The low moisture would have been 4 to 6.5 inches of precipitation, so a lot drier areas of the state that time frame. And we did see a difference in moisture, but again, when it comes to group 1 herbicides, most of the time why you see carryover is you just don't have the microbial decomposition activity, or it's super wet and you have other issues as well, or it could be weed pressure. But in general, we try to keep that down, and it's just chemical effects we try to. Husky, again, that's going to be a group 27, group 6 mixture. So there's 2 different chemicals in there. Group 27 is the HPD inhibitors. You could have some long residual problems there, but in general, the primary degradation mechanism is decomposition through microbials. Activity in the soil, same thing with group 6. You're gonna have short persistence, that's like buck trill mixed in there. You're not gonna have too many issues there, but it's mostly the group 27 herbicides. Outrider and Vero are both group 2 herbicides. So Outrider's a group 2, but it's a subcategory of SU herbicides. You probably heard about that. These persistence can be long to short on these issues. As you can see, there's a big issue with pearl millet. Millets are very sensitive to a lot of these long residual herbicides. If you go in, there might be some others. I heard German millet actually can be more sensitive, but we did pearl millet just because it's a little more common in some areas. But in general, if you see a number here less than 25%, that's the high. This is the highest we saw. So there's some plots we saw less percent loss, less loss. So this is just the highest. Sunflowers, again, on all these, especially the SU herbicides, massive losses when it comes to sunflowers, unless you have tolerant sunflower to that. Same thing with Vero. That's a ALS inhibitor group 2, but it's not an SU herbicide, so it's the same family, just a relative, I guess, in sense. So we did see some effects there on sunflowers. But again, these are just 4. I looked at 20 plus, and you can see that in the document there. And if you did this on your place, you probably would see different numbers. But I'm just giving you kind of a reference to go off of what we saw, higher effects than others on different species. So after corn silage as well, we did some herbicide research on cover crops or corn silage, and I just showed this picture to remind myself to talk about it. So if you can see right behind those wheel tracks of those straight trucks, you'll see some indention there in the soil. Wherever we had that in our plots, I can tell you exactly where those trucks drove, because we had 100% loss or 0 germination of cover crops in that area, just due to compaction. Usually after the chopper itself, we didn't have an issue because you don't have as much compaction after that, but we had way more problems with compaction after a straight truck drove or semi truck drove across the area where the plots were versus a herbicide. So 100% loss, I would say, right where those tracks are. And that's not necessarily going to be the case everywhere, but where I was, it was a no-till field, but it wasn't extensively, the cash crop rotation was just corn beans, sometimes beans on beans. So it wasn't a huge diverse crop rotation. Not a lot of structure. So again, on this one, we looked at 20 different residual herbicides sprayed pre. Everything that could be sprayed pre, we did spray pre, and those are again early May usually is where we sprayed those. And then pre-emergence of corn, and then the post ones, we did have a few post herbicides only allowed to spray post, and we did that post as well on label full rates for South Dakota. And again, 3 of these were on farm. Oh, sorry, 2 were on farm, and then 1 were on research ground. And then we had over a few hundred, about 500 some plots. Same thing, we drilled the cover crop in after corn silage, and these plots were kept weed free. Even the plots that didn't control weeds, we came in by hand and removed the weeds. So there's no weed pressure. It was just herbicide only. It's not always fun going up and down corn rows in the middle of the summer, hand weeding, let me tell you, in South Dakota. But anyways, we got through it. So corn herbicides of least concern, I've sprayed on label. You're not going to have too many issues, of course, with Roundup, Liberty, Germoxone if you spray it on label. So Paraquat there, Groxone, something like that. Enlist one, so 2,4-D, Clarity, dicamba products, Stinger, Moxie, Status, it's a mixture with dicamba there. You're not gonna have an issue if you stay on label in the cash crop if you put you plant cover crops after that crop, but you might not be able to harvest them for forage or graze them, depends on the label. Again, you have to stick with that. Liberty would give you options, Roundup gives you options, Paraquat gives you options, even the list. A lot of these would give you options if you want to go in after corn silage. Because Liberty is, I think, 90 days, I believe. It might be 70, I think 70 actually. 70 days after application so you can plant something and then graze it. So again, look at the label. And then again, this document is also online. You can download that as well and look at all the herbicides and what I found. So same thing with wheat here. I was going to show you different group numbers here: Lotus, Warrant, Atrazine, and Acuron. Some of the ones I saw more effects. So again, Lotus out of these four is the only one I applied post because it's labeled for early post application. Again, that was on label. But again, the cover crops effects we saw were kind of all over the place. There's high and low moisture situations here as well. The higher moisture is probably at a normal situation because this is 2018, 2019. So some of these situations had upwards of over 20 inches of moisture from application time till cover crop drilling. So around 3 to 4 months, somewhere in there, 3.5 months time frame. Some of these, like I'll just in general, we didn't have a lot of growth on a lot of these. So one location was Southeast Research Farm. We did have some pretty good growth on some of these, but again, radish, Winfred, they were very small even before the frost. They didn't get very big. I know some guys that can get corn silage out earlier, especially even up north part of the state. Radish can get pretty big if you get in there quick enough. But again, we drilled them just to get a good coverage. I wanted to make sure we had a good stand. And if I flew them on, which would have been better, we talked about this yesterday, would have been better for timing, but we wanted an even stand. So drilling was, of course, the best option there, is why we did that. So I wanted to make sure we had a even, as much as we can, have an even stand across some of these plots. And you can see across the board, even with atrazine, this is, atrazine was 1 pound I'm looking at here. I did do a half-pound rate as well. You can see that on the document. I looked at a 1 pound, and that's pretty common mixture within corn in South Dakota. And again, even I would say the rye in general withstood pretty well, and that's probably one of the most common cover crops grown after corn silage in South Dakota, along with some of your brassicas. But mustard is pretty weak, especially when it comes to lotus, high moisture, and that's due to, I think, it's so wet that herbicide got moved down into the soil more, the soil solution, and affected that some. Same thing with annual rye. We see some high numbers here on annual rye, which is kind of expected, but some of that could be some other issues beside herbicide as well. Some of these pH areas, even with the herbicide, some of these pH areas were over 7. We had like mid-7s on some of these. So that's a effect, especially on the ALS herbicides. But atrazine, higher moisture, there is a effect again versus the low moisture. But I think I was pleased with the stands in general, especially the rye. I liked it, except visually, if I showed you pictures of all of it, you couldn't really tell the difference in the plots at all on most of them. You couldn't tell. But the ones we lost a lot, like Warrant, we lost 42%, is the highest loss we had on annual rye. You definitely could tell that visually. But anything from like 20-30% less or less than that, visually you couldn't even tell the difference, especially with rye the next spring on some of these drier areas. For sure, you cannot tell. I walk up and down, I can hardly tell the differences between them. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we did with those. Again, that's kind of in general what we've been seeing. Is on my fault. I took pictures of a lot of these plots, but I switched phones sometime in there, and then I lost some of them somewhere. So this is one of the pictures I have. This is actually out by Groton, South Dakota. This is spring. These are the plot area I did. This was grazed. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was grazed. So that's why I see a little mud tracks out there, because it was a wet spring. I think this is in 2019 spring. And Groton, so this is the rye. So again, everything else got killed. We did have a few cowpeas survive the winter here and there, but in general, it's pretty much a 100% loss on everything else over winter. And then the rye did come back and have a good stand the next spring on every location, every year, dry, wet, except if it flooded. We didn't have any flooding issues, but that's, again, if it did flood, it would, of course, kill the rye. But in general, we had a good stand the next spring, and it did help with weed control from what I observed visually with a lot of these areas. And those, again, these were sprayed down, burned down as a pre, and then they put beans in on top of this, and I saw no issues with that. And then you had a living root in the soil for a very long time, versus if you look off to the left here and to the right, that's where we plant other cover crops. There's nothing living there at the moment, just whatever the cows scattered around, leftovers of the corn. So moving on, we did talk about intercropping yesterday a little bit. We did do some research with this the last few years, but nothing intense, just because we kind of decided, like Sexton said yesterday, there's not a lot of valuable information we were gathering. We still think it's a huge benefit, especially if you do interseeding early on with 30-inch rows. We just didn't see a lot of growth, but just some pointers with herbicide effects. You can use short-lived residual pre-herbicides. Could be used if you do like a half rate. I saw some success there in doing what I did. And then non-residual, of course, contact herbicides, you'll be all right. So again, Liberty is a contact herbicide, but I've seen effects on a burn down situation. It will set back cover crops pretty good. There's a reason why there's a rotational restriction there on that, because there is activity, I think, in the soil, but that's to be debated. Pre-mixes, like if you use like a dual product, Residua, you're gonna have issues with grasses for sure of dual, if you use dual as a pre, but like Callisto, so if you go in with annual rye only, you could come back and control the water hemp or kochia with other herbicides as well. So just be aware of that. Interseeding monocultures is always going to be easier when it comes to weed control, especially with grasses. If you put grasses in, because most weed issues, again, are going to be dicots, broadleaf plants. So we did, last year we did start a Burndown study. We're trying to look into prevent plant situations, and then how herbicide residual on burn down affects if you want to come in quickly and plant a cover crop there. Again, a lot of factors here. It'd be better if we went and put in plots like every week. That just takes a lot of room and time. So we're going to extend it a little bit more this next year, hopefully. But COVID kind of affected, so I didn't get in the field till late. Land was mostly taken up on research farms too next spring by the time I got there, because we can do stuff with COVID effects and stuff like that. But we did get some research in, and I'll kind of show some pictures about it, what we did last year. We're trying to get people just to have some information on hand. If I spray this as a burn down, I just want something growing out there and prevent plant situation in South Dakota. What can I do? What to look at, etc. So in general, we did the same thing. I came in, this is my self-propelled sprayer. I can control the speed with my own brain. It's pretty nice, but definitely acreage coverage is an issue with that. And then we came in a week later, so I did a full rate on some of these, or somewhat of a full rate on some herbicides, to see the effects on some of these cover crops, just to get an idea of what we're dealing with. Drilled it as well a week later, and then I'm going to show you some pictures here. So this is from, this is a check plot. This is my chemical check plot, a Roundup Paramax, 22 fluid ounces. We sprayed a week before. So as you can see, there's a lot of water hemp pressure here. I'm showing these pictures mainly to show the water hemp pressure also as effects. So it's not just chemical effects. You can see there's radishes. There's supposed to be radishes down there. But mostly you see is water hemp. We have if there are weed pressure here, this is sprayed, burned down about a few weeks prior to us drilling And then I came in, of course, before drilling a week before and sprayed it again. This is 2 applications of Roundup Power Max, and some of these weeds were about 6 inches, I would say, or less at the time of when I did a burn down. So again, a lot of weed pressure there, not a chemical effect on that cover crop. This is sharpened at 1 fluid ounce. So we have in this picture here, it's hard to see some of the species, but this is radish, rape, and then turnip, I believe, in the back there. So sharpened again, 1 fluid ounces. I think it's recommended on the label 1 month out. So we did see some losses there on some of these species. Decent weed control. You don't see a lot there when it comes to weeds, but we did see some effects on some of those species. So there was, this is, I think, sorghum Sudan, there's millet back here, and then there's cowpeas and sunflower. Basically, the cowpeas and sunflower didn't survive majority of any of these herbicide applications except Roundup, of course. So we basically killed all of them. It is so quick after application. Again, this is off label. I was just looking at, we're going to do some more research on this coming year. AIM, 1.5 fluid ounces applied a week prior to planting. Decent weed control, I would say, not too bad. And we had good cover crop stands across the board. And again, that's because AIM has very little to no residual problems. Even though the label says you can't do it, I can't remember the label says exactly, but it doesn't allow you to plant some stuff within a short time period after application. Harmony, it's a shorter residual herbicide at 0.75 fluid ounces. Sorry, ounces. It's a dry chemical. 0.75 ounces is what I sprayed it at. Decent weed control, and we had great stands, especially on brassicas, and our grass species did well. Besides cowpea and sunflower did not do well. Some of them did survive. I don't have pictures of those, but we had a lot of ALS herbicide damage on the leaves. Affinity, again, a dry product, I believe, 0.7 ounces. Again, weed pressure was crazy on these plots, so Affinity didn't control the water hemp. So it kind of took out our stands. Sterling Blue. Sterling Blue is the off-brand of dicamba like Clarity. Great weed control. We did have some setbacks of our brassica species. Our grass species did well, of course, in there. But again, when we did see, just some observations, when we did see some lack of germination here problems, the radishes and turnips and rape and stuff compensated, and they leafed out more. So we still have good ground coverage. If you look down there, though, even though the effects of germination were there for sure. 2,4-diamine setback. It's a growth regular herbicide, so it set back the turnips, radishes, rape, and about everything set back pretty well. But germination was still okay, I would say, and weed control was okay, but it did set back the cover crops pretty good. Ester, not as bad there. We did see some loss as well. And then Stinger, so I sprayed a pretty high rate, 1/2 pint. If you went lower, like 1/3, you'd probably see a better stand. But again, not the greatest weed control, and we had a lot of effects on the cover crop. Scorch is a combination of Floxapyr, 2,4-D ester, I believe, and then dicamba mixture. Great weed control, but at the rates that the product have in it, we had decent stands, and I was actually the most pleased with this one. Again, off-label, you can't graze this, but had good weed control and good cover crop stand overall. And we're going to look into some of these more this coming year, God willing. Moxie, basically no residual problems, and we had good weed control. So I was actually pleased with this as well. So we had probably the best stand with Moxie because it had good weed control and it had basically no residual problems there as well with water hemp. So I'd say we had a 80 to 90% weed control there with a lot of water hemp in those plots. So I was super pleased with Moxie, and I like that chemical a lot. And again, we don't disintegrate against anybody. All right, so here's my contact information, and we can talk more about it now.
Great, thank you very much, Garrett. That was excellent presentation. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We're going to put up, I think it's time to put up the ccacode. It's only for a half of credit of pest management. So if Gared could unview or unshare his screen and
trying to.
That's fine. We'll
For some
just
reason, all I see is faces, and I can't figure to go back to other.
You may be able to share over his screen, Anthony.
Yeah, okay, David, give it a try. So, Garrett, once you told me how many or how much counting you did, how much per plot did you count? Was it 3 feet or 2 feet or a meter or?
I believe we did a half meter square on those plots. The plots were about 8 by 40 and each, so it's a subplot. So every cover crop was about 8 foot wide, 8 by 5. So we did a half meter squared on those.
Okay. So you told me how many linear feet of row you counted one time. Did you calculate that out again? It was over a mile or something like that.
Yeah, it was over a mile. I can't figure it out. I try not to think about it, but I did have some help there on some of those plots. We had some help through some other student help, but in general, I did a lot of that. But it was actually nice, peaceful time. Me and the cover crops.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's quite a few, and again, I mean, that was a quick overview, and there's going to probably be some questions. So cover crops are very intricate. It's not simply just herbicide interactions. I mean, planting issues, and I talk about this in other presentations, weather. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that engages with cover crops.
We have a couple questions, Gared. I'll read the first one. Can you elaborate more on the effects you saw with Liberty as a burn down prior to planting the cover crops?
Yeah, so I didn't show pictures on here because I think we had some other effects besides Liberty. I did see okay stands like a week. So I sprayed, was it 32 fluid ounces, whatever the full rate is. And then a week later, we drilled these cover crops in. We had a stand of everything grew, but everything was set back a lot. The brassicas were set back. They were small. They didn't look good. So I think if you waited, so the label, I believe, I think it is 70 days. If you waited upwards of 70 days, you can on label drill those in. But I think if you waited out even a few more weeks, then not just a week out, so maybe 2 to 3 weeks out, you'd see a lot better stands and growth. You just couldn't graze it or hay it on those situations.
Okay, without knowing it, I think you covered the second part of that question. What do you think would be the safe window to wait? And so I think you covered that.
Yeah, and again, that's a guesstimation. I wish I would have had. So I like Liberty. It's a great herbicide, great burn down. It's just it does have some slight effects soon after application. I'm not sure why that is, because it shouldn't. But I'm going to do some more look into that. I like Liberty as this. It's easy to apply, easy to mix. It's just I like Liberty. I'm not promoting Liberty, but glufosinate as a chemical, I like it. Okay, so Sterling Blue dicamba. Somebody has a question. I don't know. Is that a question or is that just a comment?
I don't know, but tell us what you know about those.
So yeah, Sterling Blue is dicamba. It's just it's what Agtager had on hand when I needed it, and I needed it quickly. So that's what I bought. Clarity again, same thing. In general, when it comes to carryover, usually it depends on rate. I'd have to look. It's 3 to 4 weeks, I think, is what most labels say. When it comes, you're kind of safe after that point. But if things are rushed, I think a week to 2 in, you could be okay on some of these species. But if you want to graze or hay, I think it's going to be longer than that. I think it's upwards of 2 to 3 months, I believe. Some of those labels aren't super clear on that.
So I've heard you talk before about Paraquat. Is that a good burn down to use prior to planting a cover crop, or what are your comments about that?
So Paraquat's super, it binds really, actually the residual effects are nothing, but the chemical is still there. So Paraquat, Permoxone, whatever you want to call it, it binds to the soil particles really strong. So really super strong binding. So the chemical's there for a very long time. It just, you don't see the effects of it. It's not in the soil solution to take up in the plants. But I think it does a pretty good job. I've heard of mixed results on Burndown with Paraquat because coverage is always going to be your issue with Paraquat. So you got to have good coverage. You got to have, if the weeds are huge, you got to make sure you get good coverage. Because I've sprayed weeds that are 4 feet tall with Paraquat and they come back because you didn't get the base covered well. It doesn't translocate unless you have super high rates, and you could see some translocation, but it doesn't translocate in general. So you're not going to see like a translocation herbicide like Scorch. It has 2,4-D in there, dicamba, Loxapyr. You're going to see more translocation there on those. Especially with water hemp. I've sprayed water hemp as tall as me. I'm 6'5", and again, you need something that translocates well on some of those.
Jared, can you just speak to, since you're talking about about Paraquat, I have had over the last couple of years quite a few questions on and off about people trying to use Paraquat and Roundup to burn down before their cover crops. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the label.
It's off label.
It's off. I'm pretty sure it's off label. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't want to say something off. That's wrong. I'm pretty sure it's off label. Yeah, I think there's an antagonism, I think, between them two. I know for sure between, somebody else might know on here.
Yeah,
sure
I guess
between atrazine and Roundup for sure is something to do with the mode of action when it enters the plant. I think it affects it when you have Roundup with, again, I'm not a chemical expert by any means.
No, I believe there's some antagonism, and that's why it's off label, because it actually renders them less effective.
Yeah, it's something to do with, I remember, I've read this somewhere, when because the way Roundup goes into the plant, and same thing with Paraquat, when it kills whatever it kills on the outside of the plant, it can't, Roundup can't get in the plant and move very well if the Paraquat kills the site of action, I guess, or mode of action area.
Yep. I was just saying, wanted to mention that because I think it's, at least in this southeast area, it's been done, and I don't think people realize that they're probably hurting themselves, not helping.
Yeah. So again, if you have Roundup resistance, there's not great options if you want to do it besides Paraquat. Liberty's there. Liberty is great, but again, you're going to be limited by label, and I think a few weeks out, I'm not sure I can't give you a good time frame, but a few weeks out for sure on when you can come in safely. The label says 70 days. I'm pretty sure somebody can quote me on that. I'm pretty sure it's 70. When you can come in and do everything whatever you want after 70 days, but I think you'd be fine at upwards of a 2 weeks to a month out, depending on rate.
We have a few more questions coming in, so that's good. I'll ask one here. Or do you see it, Garrett, in the questions?
Yeah, I can see him here. So there's somebody do you have any suggestions on what you think would be a safer residual to use that work on water hemp that might not impact most cover crops as much? If you're planting just soil health, we are in corn and soybean. So safer residuals. Good question. So there's no, I mean, it's a safer residual. So there's really no, I would say 100% safe residual in general. 100%. I have a hard time giving you it. Yeah, so anything that's going to be a long residual is going to be an issue in general, somewhat. It just depends on how much damage you want or you can handle. Some of these I found I could handle a lot of them, but in general, Some of them I wouldn't like on my own place. And if you're in corn, soybean, so again, I think species is the big one there. So almost anything, when I come in with rye, so as we're talking about winter rye or just rye in general, not annual rye, I'd be okay with rye on about anything you spray on corn. If you're doing it after silage, or even if you're in a southern part of the state and you're coming in after grain harvest and you're drilling it in, if you can do that quick enough, I would say you're okay there. I'd just say it's species specific there. Some of these I would stay away from. Again, high rates of atrazine, I would stay away from. Some of these mixtures can get into trouble that have group 27s in them, like Acuron. If you're in wheat, be like Husky has it in there. So I don't know, there's a great answer to that. I don't know if that helped. So, and then Eric, you said, do you have any suggestions for spraying overwinter patches of rapeseed, turnip, or annual ryegrass? So stuff that survived, I'm guessing, is what you're mentioning. So growth regular herbicides do well on the turnip and rapeseed, from what I've seen. Can at 240, not as much, maybe ester better with those instead of amine. But Roundup again is great as well if you can get good contact and action there. I've seen issues with Paraquat on turnip. Annual ryegrass, I think Roundup's going to be, you could have some I could be misspoken here, but isn't annual ryegrass found in the past to be tolerant? There's been some places, I think there's been some resistant issues with annual ryegrass and Roundup, but I could be wrong on that. But annual ryegrass, I would go after any of your grass herbicides pretty well. Take control of ryegrass and Roundup as well. Kind of like Post. Some other ones I'm blanking now, but it depends on, I guess, what you're rotating your cash crop to that spring. But there's some thoughts. Sorry, it's really hard. There's so much going on here, so much interaction. It's hard to give specific advice sometimes. So if you have other questions, you can always call me too. Did I answer those questions well, or you want to say something, you can, or?
Sure, I don't have any experience taking down the annual ryegrass, but I've used Sharpen as a burn down on the brassicas, and that has seemed to work pretty good.
Yeah, AIM as well. I just came to mind. AIM on some of these species will knock them down, but we haven't did a lot of like cover crop, like burning the cover crop down research. We should. Just stuff I know is stuff that I've seen in producers' fields and from other universities. There are some information online about that, but we have nothing from SDSU, I believe, from just like cover crops, growing them out and then burning them down. There might be something that has been done in the past, but nothing I'm aware of.
Okay, there are a couple questions in the chat too, Gared.
Okay.
One about, did you list some products that cannot be grazed? I think you kind of went through that. This person had to come in a little late.
Oh, yeah.
So
Darren,
maybe touch on that again. Yeah.
So in general, you always have to go to the label. Some of these labels say what you can and can't do when it comes to planting and grazing haying. Some are clear on that, some are not. It's easy just to get a PDF you can pull it up on your computer. You just put it in the search box on your PDF if you know how to do that. Easiest way is put grazing or forage in there, and it'll come up in the label where it's at. If the label doesn't say that, I would suggest talking to the manufacturer of the chemical or the rep and see what they say, because a lot of these, some don't care, some do care. So I just stay out of legal problems there is kind of the big one. Because most of them do, especially with, I think, Bayer, and then there's a few other companies that do list it pretty clearly on the label, but that's becoming more common. But again, a lot of them don't. Some of them don't say anything. about it. So I would just ask, because sometimes it doesn't say anything because they don't have a restriction for that, and sometimes they don't say anything, they just don't have it on there. So I would ask just to be safe. Looks like Susan, she says, very new to planting here in Florida, was curious about the effects on bees. Are you like residual problems for bees? Oh, for like sunflower in the, I don't know about that. That's a good question. I'm not an entomologist. So I guess if a bee, would take pollen from a sunflower plant that could have herbicide residual problems, effects on it, I guess that could potentially affect the pollen. I'm not a entomologist, so I'm not sure on that one.
We have Dwayne on, Dr. Beck.
Wayne might know.
I wonder if he would know, if he would want to share a comment there or not. Anyway, we have a, go ahead, sir.
I was looking in the chat, I see if maybe we had an entomologist attending, but I don't see anybody at the moment.
Yeah, if Susan, if you get a hold of Adam Barenhorst, SDSU, he might know. I'm not sure if he's looked into that at all, but potentially, I guess. I don't know how herbicides actually affect the pollen. I'm guessing it does. And I'm not sure how that affects the bees themselves, but it probably depends on chemical too, what chemical it is. But again, sunflowers are super sensitive, especially if the ones that do survive in some of these, you'll see a lot of growth of regular herbicide like 2,4-D dicamba damage on the leaves, or ALS herbicides like group 2s. I see a lot of damage like whitening on the edges of the leaves, stunting growth, stuff like that.
We forgot the poll, right? Or did that go up?
Oh, there it is.
There it is. Matt was waiting. Please take a moment to fill out the poll. It helps us to know if our programming is doing its job.
And I think while people are filling that out, if there's more questions, there's 5 of us here that can hopefully help. But those herbicide specific ones, we just kind of throw those to Gared.
Yeah.
I usually stumble over it because there's so much going on here.
Yeah.
So if you have specific questions, you can always contact me, and I like to think through each chemical individually because it's easier. That's why, but on this research, I looked at so much stuff. There's a lot going on there. So
it was great work. A lot of hard work there.
And again, we're going to look at hopefully more of the burn down planting stuff here in South Dakota this year. Hopefully COVID won't affect us as much this year.
Yeah, I have a kind of question. Sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's not a question. It's more about, I was just thinking, it's great that we're trying to test, individual cover crop species, with individual herbicide, interaction type thing, and that's to give, to have some kind of reference on how these individual species of cover crops respond to certain herbicide or certain, group of herbicides. But usually we plant, as a blend, most of us anyways, right? As a producer. And then you had various level of survival or establishment in those cover crop spaces. So if a grower, without knowing all of this, goes and buys a bag of seed, which will have 15 different species, that person will still have a good chance or a great chance of at least something surviving, for the purpose that person is trying to plant those cover crops in the field, right? I mean, there's nothing like everything will die or everything will just not get established at all.
Yeah.
Did you hear me, Gared?
So, sorry, say that again. Sorry, I was distracted.
Did you hear me that when you plant some cover crops in a blend, there's a good chance or a great chance that something will survive or more than one species will survive regardless of cover. That's what's my thought.
Yeah. So we did it individually. Yeah. So if you have a mixture, and I think there might be some something going on there which we don't know what's going on. If there's a mixture, sometimes the species that are more sensitive seem to handle chemicals differently as well. So you might see, if I do it individually, you might see more sensitivity to a certain cover crop. And if you put it in a mixture, you might see some different growth habits. I don't know if there's something to do with when the chemicals uptaking into all the root systems, that there's just less in some of the more sensitive ones. So then you'll see less effects, I'm guessing is what's happening. Because all plants, if there's herbicide available in the soil solution, the plants will uptake it. It just depends on the tolerant, how much the plant's either it's genetically modified so it can handle it, like GMO crops, or it just naturally is highly tolerant to some of these chemicals, which is some of the case. Yeah, David. Yeah, we should probably look into some mixtures as well. We were just trying to figure out species and do things.
And that wasn't a real question, that was just my thought. That's kind of I was gathering when I looked at your data. That's just my head. I thought I would just put it out there. But there is another question there. I don't know you saw that or not on Q&A.
Oh, so a question is, if buckwheat comes back the next spring, have you seen it difficult to control in either corn or soybeans? I don't have much experience with buckwheat. I've heard of that being an issue, but majority of at least corn herbicide, and especially the newer soybean technology we have, shouldn't be an issue when it comes to buckwheat. Again, I think buckwheat, the coverage is going to be an issue there, as long as it's not underneath something else. It gets good coverage. I haven't heard of an issue there. Eric, you probably deal with that more than I do, so I'd be interested to see the situations with that.
I think it's probably time we can go into the discussion and make everyone panelists, if that's what we want to do. If the questions have kind of fallen off, it also could be an indication of time to quit. But we want to be here for any questions that you have, and bring those about. Thank you, Liz, for the nice comment. Thanks for attending today. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Yeah, multi-state project would be helpful.
We all kind of get stuck in our own rut and doing things, and we forget to think about our cross-border colleagues. I just want to review what's going on next week. Thank you for your attendance in the Soil Health Week. It's been really, really good. Next week is the Forages Week, and maybe Sara wants to just go through that.
Sure, I can do that, but that probably means I should pull it up, because if you know me, you know that I can't do anything from memory. So give me like 2 seconds.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was kind of cold on my part.
Nope, that's fine. I should have known. Should have known. Okay. So, and if you have questions, feel free to pipe up or put them in the chat while I'm talking here. So next week, we're again Tuesday through Friday. And on the 23rd, Tuesday, we're going to have Paul Johnson talking about weed control in pasture and range, as well as weed control and establishing alfalfa. And so those are pretty popular questions, especially that alfalfa establishment piece. So I encourage you to join in if that applies to you. On Wednesday, we're talking about weed control again with Gared, alternative weed control methods in pasture and range. So that's mainly non-chemical. So is that clipping, burning, things like that. And Gared can sure pipe in if he has more. And then we're also going to have Dr. Krista Ehlert talk. She is with SDSU Extension. She's going to talk on range management and some general range management practices that we can have, just some good management practices. Thursday, the 25th, we're talking alfalfa insect pests, and alfalfa diseases. Pat Wagner, one of our extension entomology field specialist, sorry, and Dr. Emmanuel Bayamakama is and Connie Strunk are our disease folks. They're going to be talking on pests. We're also going to fit Anthony in on the end there on Thursday for a short forages and soil fertility talk. So that'll be, Anthony, I'm sure you'll probably talk a little on the alfalfa Rex, but there's a lot of forages and cover crops being used as forages now that don't have hard and fast recommendations. So I doubt he's going to tell us you need to put this much on every time, but I think it'll be interesting to see what you say, Anthony. A lot of questions around that. And then the last day on Friday, we're talking about round bale conservation. I'm just going to go over some good round bale storage techniques. We did a demonstration in South Dakota a couple of years ago that yielded some kind of fun results to talk about that people often overlook. And Jack Davis is going to finish off the week talking about markets, haystacks, and market outlook on forages. So some fun, exciting things next week. I always say that we are one of the nation's top forage producers. We always end up in the top 4 or 5 on the production list that NASS puts out, but it is vastly, widely overlooked as a crop and a crop to manage in South Dakota. So I encourage you to join us if you grow forages. And I don't see any Q&A, but if anybody has anything, feel free to ask.
Yeah, I do.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of questions because I need to learn a lot. I'm just wondering, for Jared, are you still there? Do I contact you by your name, sdsu.edu? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's my first Gared, then there's a period, and then Shaffer. Yeah, you gotta put that period in there.
Okay. Would you actually give me your phone number?
Yeah, here at the office. Yeah,
the office would be fine.
Sorry, what is the office phone number?
Yeah, 605.
605. I'm thinking the last 290. Wait, 626.
I'll email you. Okay.
Okay, hold on. I don't give out my office phone number much. Here it is. 605 626 2870.
2870. Thank you. Okay, know how to find you.
I put his email in the chat there, Kristen. So
right, but I forgot it. I'm having,
No, I just put it in there now.
Oh, okay.
So you have it.
Okay.
But yeah, anytime I'm available, I'll pick up. So
are you at SDSU or in Aberdeen?
Yeah, I'm in Aberdeen. So we have regional centers. So we have regional center here in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And
now I have your attention. I was the one that did Sterling Blue and dicampa. When people say dicampa, I kind of have some feelings on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there.
All right. Okay.
But yeah, so dicamba is just the chemical. Sterling Blue is the one name brand.
Trade name. Mm-hmm.
Trade name. Clarity is another one. There's others out there.
But they're all dicampa, which is the technical term.
So
isn't dicampa a trade name?
No, it's the chemical. So then there's like Extendamax, Ingenia. Those are ones we're spraying over top of beans now.
Okay.
There's others out there as well. But.
Okay. I have a man who will spray for me to get rid of, I have a garden, and he gave me information about dicampa and where it tends to want to be an immigrant and will go other places, and maybe it will kill my little trees or flowers and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, there is some volatility issues with dicamba. The newer ones are a little better, but yeah, no matter what, it's just a chemical that likes to move off target.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Jared, this is Danny. I'd like to make a comment on the tame buckwheat. I had that experience, and it's a lot of you guys have probably heard my story, but so we were really wet 2 years ago in the spring. We needed a place to plant spring wheat, and it was on the kind of a side hill. So we had a full season cover there. So we planted spring wheat on a full season cover. And a lot of the buckwheat came back, and I thought, well, we could take it out with our spray that we usually spray on our wheat. The only thing is that it kept raining during the year, and the buckwheat kept coming, and it was quite an issue, quite a problem. And so we went ahead and harvested it. And then the next year he said, well, I want to take care of it. So that I said, we'll come back with corn. And basically I did a Residual on it, and there's still buckwheat come back. And I think part of that is that you know, there was a lot of seeds, because even in the wheat year, I let it go to seed. So a lot of these issues I made myself, but what you stop and think about it, that buckwheat was planted in like the 10th of July. And so it would have been, you know, you could probably help me, you guys, but I'm guessing in what, like 40 days, she would have been making seed. So I gave it a lot of opportunity, but I just wanted to share that a little bit. I'm not saying it's an issue, but I think it's something the guys should be aware of when you plant something like that, because it can go to seed on you really easy.
Yeah, I think buckwheat's a pretty tough plant in general, from what I can tell. But it's definitely a useful cover crop, from what I can tell. Thanks, Danny. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't, you know, if you want to comment a little bit about cover crops becoming weeds. I know when cover crops first came on the scene, and, you know, even in recent years, people make those comments about, why would I want to plant weeds? And we know the soil health benefits and the reasons for doing that. But have you seen examples or heard anything about where that cover crop crossed that line and, gee, you know, it really, now it's a weed, you know, out there? Have you seen anything like that, Gared?
Yeah, I have heard of some issues. So weed is just a plant out of place. So anything can be a weed. It's not really a science term. We use it like it's a science term, but it's not really a science term. It's just a plant we don't like in the specific place. But yeah, I've seen, especially, it seems like most of the issue is overwintering, and the next spring that's something that should die and it doesn't, and then how to get rid of it. Something pretty tough. It seems like I've seen, I think it's even pictures, maybe Anthony, you sent me. I can't remember what issues it was, but you saw some issues with burning down. I think it was a radish or a turnip or something. So some of those plants can be tough, because I think I'm not a plant.
Like that hard
the cuticle,
seed and the cuticles.
The cuticle, I think, gets really thick.
Mhm.
Plants, especially if they overwinter, or something happens in there that as soon as the cuticle gets thick, it's harder to kill it. So like a plant that's in a greenhouse, the same plant there, you spray it, it's going to be, I think the cuticle gets thinner in a greenhouse, I believe. If it's outside, it's going to get thicker because it's just the environment's around. So it's something to do with that. It's some of it. So I think it's some of the issue. Some of it's just bad management, not to be mean, but some of the issues I've seen, it's just farmers forget about it. They just let it go. That's usually when it becomes a weed. It has to be highly managed. I think Dwayne Beck always talks about that. I mean, just because when you start getting into no-till and diversity, management increases. It's not easy, because you can't just go talk to your neighbor what he's doing, because usually you're on your own. There's nobody usually that knows everything about your situation either. So you got to think a lot. But yeah, I think some of it comes down to management, and then there is some plant issues there as well. But yeah, so
yeah, the one that comes across most common would be the brassicas, because they're winter annuals. And dicamba really, I heard somebody bad mouthing dicamba, but that's one that does take that out of there. But whenever you're putting in a cover crop, you should be thinking about your next crop.
Yeah.
Both from a weed and disease standpoint, and how you're going to manage that if it does make it across. Like buckwheat is tough supposedly, but you put a bromoxynol on it, that's where Bucteril got its name, is it just blasts the heck out of buckwheat. So you have to know some of those things, I think, in order to address that better. Of course, it goes after the wild buckwheat, but it gets the tame stuff as well. And one of those things is diseases, and it's fairly common for diseases to get bridged across, and with aphomydes in the pulse crops that also can get soybeans and could also get alfalfa. There's a lot of room for root diseases to come across. I did have an instance a few years ago where someone who sells cover crops called me and discussed that cover crops were supposed to help reduce diseases, and he had a grower that he sold a cover crop to that said he thought the diseases were increased. And I asked about the mix, and the mix contained soybeans. And he was planting soybeans that year. So he had phytophthora come across in the part of the field where he planted the soybeans, where he had the soybeans in the cover crop. So, I mean, cover crops are great, but just treat them like they're part of your normal rotation. If you wouldn't plant that crop before the crop you're planning to plant the next year, if you wouldn't plant that whatever component you put in that cover crop the year before you planted your planned crop, don't put it in the cover crop. So going to soybeans, we often have no broadleaves in the cover. We just have grass crops. We don't have any warm season grasses where we're going to corn, for instance. So that's just my recipe. It's not one that everybody else uses, but we think that reduces our chance of a problem.
Yeah, thanks, Dwayne.
I didn't answer before, Anthony, because I didn't have my microphone hooked
It's
up to the
okay.
computer. So I was listening. I was just planning on lurking today instead of participating.
Oh, that's okay, Dwayne. Thank you. Thank you for
I like
coming
that.
on.
You can call it Zoom lurking, Dwayne.
You know, I've got a question for whoever, but has anybody had any trouble with your, like if you're going to plant a graze and mix by using German millet or any white wonder millet with a lot of seeds, and have you ever had trouble with that the next year? I'm just wondering what people's experience is on that by using it in the cover.
I think Peter's done that at the Southeast Farm. Anthony, does that ring a bell? I want to say they have done that, but I was not a part of that. I don't.
The first 60-inch corn study that I saw had millet in it, and the seed production was huge. And that's the first thing came across my mind. And that producer, of course, went to soybeans, and you know, we can take grasses out of broadleaves pretty easily. So he didn't say that there was any big problems, but that's the first thing that crossed my mind. So yeah, what Dwayne just said is jeepers. You know, how do we teach ourselves? How do we gather all that knowledge? It's what he said is so profound. Just said about if you wouldn't normally plant, you know, that crop ahead of itself, then you probably shouldn't do it. So what I'm saying is a grass ahead of a grass. You know, we got to think about those things. And these long-term, these full season cover crops, they're going to go to seed. And, you know, I've seen plants try to go to seeded after cereal grains. You know, that's their whole survival of the fittest mode is produce at least one seed to get to the next generation. And so we have to really think about that. But I have not seen any big issues, and Dwayne has probably maybe heard of them as well. Anybody else? This is your chance to share, and we can learn from you. We're always learning. So if anybody's in the group had that experience, please share in the chat or turn on your mic or whatever. We encourage that.
Anthony, we've talked about this before, but would you want to touch, you started talking on ryegrass and cereal rye, and can you kind of explain, you said once before about the ryegrasses you should use. Could you kind of explain that again, please?
Yeah, you know, the difference between cereal rye and ryegrass, big difference. Cereal rye is a grain, a cereal grain, and can be used to make bread. We harvest the seeds for food. Annual ryegrass is a forage grass. We don't harvest the seeds for food because they're really small. And so we harvest the seeds so we can plant them again to grow forage. So it has become a popular cover crop. There are haploid and tetraploid versions of, now I'm talking genetics and I'm not a geneticist, but there are versions of wild types, or whatever we call them in genetics, that are more prone to being Roundup resistant, and that's occurred in places around the world. So we need to be very careful which one our cover crop provider selects and buys. And I think most of them know that now, and I'm not the expert on that. Sara, do you know anything about that, or have heard anything
I haven't
specific?
heard much on the genetic side specifically about that. It comes up once in a while in the forage world, but the key is kind of what you just said. You have to watch what you're buying and make sure you're getting what you intend. And I'd throw in that if you're not familiar with the differences between the seeds, cereal rye is also called winter rye, which can be confusing. It's planted in that winter annual period. So we plant that in the fall, whereas annual ryegrass is more of an annual, but can tend to have hard seed. So that's one thing you hear people complain about, the persistence of annual ryegrass, and that can be controlled in some cases, but it does have a little bit of a tendency to have hard seed, where we don't see that as much in cereal rye.
And I think we should say the cereal rye issue, if you're growing other types of cereal grains for seed,
yes,
please don't grow them on your farm. And cereal rye, I think of it as more of a cover crop for the East, where we don't have a lot of cereal grains in our rotation. But that's starting to change. And so, a farmer friend of mine once said, once you have cereal rye, he said, once you have rye, you always have rye.
It's there forever.
And that is, I think, basically very true, because that plant, as I recall someone telling me, it was a weed in the upper Mesopotamia, and they got tired of fighting it, so they just lived with it and domesticated it and started to adapt it as a cereal grain. So it's very tough. It's very resilient, and it competes with weeds and has those allelopathic effects. So a lot of issues around cereal rye, and we need to be very careful with it, as well as annual ryegrass. But I have seen some wonderful examples of annual ryegrass as a cover crop, as a forage, because that's what it is, and it produces a wonderful forage. I'm told in Wisconsin that they rotate annual ryegrass pastures with alfalfa and corn, and so they are very successful with that over there. So they're the experts on the annual ryegrass, as far as I'm concerned, and the folks in Oregon.
Basically, anybody that's looking for high quality forage or dairies, you'll see that. So that's part of the reason we see it in Wisconsin. But yeah, they kind of have a corn, alfalfa, ryegrass, some type of that rotation that works really well for them, especially in the dairy world. I was going to throw in that an interesting thing we've seen people do is plant cereal rye at the end of so that it doesn't vernalize, is what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't overwinter. We'll see people just plant it so that they can, in the spring, for example, so they can just get forage mass on it and it shouldn't go to seed. And that's been experimented with. I don't know of anyone that's done any actual, randomized replicated experiments yet on that, but we do get questions on that occasionally for forage, just to grow it and not try to put grain on it. So there's all kinds of creative things people can do. And I see Emmanuel put in the chat, which is a good point. I was thinking about this too. Rye can be a source of ergot inoculum, so it's highly susceptible to that. So that's another thing just to look for. And like Anthony said, if you grow cereal grains, especially for seeds, just don't, it's just not a good idea. It can't be cleaned out. So it's not something you want to be roguing your fields for. Garrett, there is
I saw
Paraquat
the
question
camera. Yeah. So Paraquat can be sprayed around trees. So if you look on the Paraquat label, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff on there about trees and vines and how to spray around them. But yeah, a young tree, Paraquat can't kill. That's why a lot of them will say like you have to like cover up young trees or something like that. If it's like a, I don't know, orchard or something like that, you can spray around a lot of fruit trees as well. But yeah, I've seen paraquat kill young trees if it's direct sprayed. But I think larger ones like a drift situation, usually they'll come out of it. It just might kill a few branches if there's a young branch or something growing out that's green. It might just knock it down. But from what I've seen, at least, and what I know,
You want to be very careful with paraquat.
in general, it's just, I mean, I would be more concerned about personal safety around paraquat, just because, I mean, that's why you have to go through separate training around paraquat, because you have to be in a well-ventilated area, because there's been people that died just from breathing it in, I think. Yeah, I personally don't even like, diquat does similar burn down. It's a little safer. But paraquat's just used because it does a good job of, because usually you can see the effects of it right behind your sprayer. I mean, you don't even need markers. I've sprayed it before, and usually the second pass by, the stuff you've already sprayed is already wilting, and you can see the effects of it pretty fast.
Yeah, very effective. And surprisingly, there are weeds that have developed resistance to paraquat, which is very surprising to me.
I don't know if you can hear me, but this is Elaine Rogg here, Henry's wife. Be really careful with cereal rye. Henry's grandfather planted a field of rye many years ago, even before Henry was born, and the kids and I spent countless hours, several years, pulling rye out of this field so we could clean it up, so we could grow good seed on it.
Yeah,
but that rye really lasts. It's a dirty
Anthony
word
has some
around
stories
here.
about that as well. Yeah.
I've done similar, probably nowhere near as what you have, Mrs. Rogger, but I've done that with my kids in a winter wheat field, and so
Yep.
I have firsthand experience with that myself. So.
Yep. The kids always tease him they're going to plant rye on his grave because they spent so many hours pulling rye.
I think
That's pretty good.
yeah, you got to know your crop rotation. I think rye is just a good tool. Why I mentioned it so much because most people on the eastern side of the state plant a lot of corn beans, and if you're doing from corn to beans, with beans, rye is a handy cover crop. It can be used well. But
The winter annual factor, is really nice.
Yeah, we haven't talked.
Go ahead.
Sorry, we haven't talked about planting green, and that's one of the tools in that process. Of course, you can plant green into winter wheat, or as well, but the cereal rye is used in one of those tools. So you see the pictures of them cripper rolling it and things like that. So, but yeah, it's. Man, and we talked about flying it on yesterday or flying on cereals yesterday, and I found out that those planes don't shut off all the time. So when they make their big circle, there could be some hung up in the diffusers. It's just air that diffuses it out, and there could be some hung up in the diffusers, or how things are when they try to shut off and you have a seed or two hanging in there and then it dribbles out. Well, I spread some, or my plane that I hired spread some on my neighbors. I had some on my house. So it doesn't always shut off. So those are some big issues I think we have to really take into account. So. See, Mark talks about burning trees with paraquat. Yeah, it's it'll move, or it'll drift too, and that's got to be very careful. It's a good tool. I mean, it burns fast. I think that additives are so important with a lot of these burn down herbicides that we use. So I don't know if Gared would comment about that or not, but
Say that again. Sorry.
Oh, the additives are really important with these. I don't know if your comment would probably be follow the label, of course, and go that way.
Yeah, whatever the label suggests, I would do it. Especially with tougher, especially if you want to kill cover crops, if it tells you to put an additive in or a surfactant or something like that, definitely use it. You can make a horrible herbicide look a lot better with a good additive. They found the same thing with Roundup. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff on the market. Some things are true, some things not so much true, but you can make because a lot of those are helping either stick to the leaf or get into the plant itself, so you can get more herbicide to the contact point to kill it. There's a lot of problems is just getting the herbicide to the plant where you can kill it. And yeah, resistance mechanisms are not just genetic. Sometimes it's the plant finds other way around it. Or weather could be a factor, like rain soon after, something like that. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any. Oh, Dan, go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry, Anthony. Jared, have you guys used it, and maybe you talked about it because I had a call during there, but have you guys ever used any Paraquat, Starane and Elevore on your burn off? It seems like it's going to be labeled pre-emerge on sunflowers here in a year or two, but I mean, have you ever done that or used that or tried that Elevore?
I have not. No, I haven't. So what's the name of it?
It's Paraquat.
Paraquat. Oh, I've heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, it's Starane and Elevore, and it really works. It's just so we don't overuse Starane, but I mean, a lot of it's used in sunflowers south of us, in the county south of us, going to sunflowers right before, whenever they say the label's 2 weeks, but a lot of guys are going right after they plant, and it's working. So
okay,
just something to look at. I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, just something to look at.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
And then are you guys, there's a lot of people are planting 60-inch corn, and I was on a deal with Jay Fury the other day, and at the Minokan farm, they're doing a lot of like they're putting grass mixes in sunflowers, and they're doing a lot of they're putting every crop he plants, he's got a companion crop. And are you guys working on any of that? Or I mean, it's kind of hard to get a chemical to get everything done, but I was just wondering, Jared, is that in the future? Are you guys thinking that? Or
thinking for, sorry, say that one more time.
Or what chemicals you could use, like if you were going to intercrop, like go in there, like just like on 60-inch corn, where you go in there at fifth collar or something. Have you guys played with that at all, or?
Not too much, no. That's kind of a newer thing that I feel like we're kind of behind on a little bit. It hasn't been adopted well, I guess, is one reason that maybe we're not pursuing it too much. I know the Soil Health Coalition has did more than we have on that, but when it comes to chemicals and engaging with that, I don't have a lot of good data on that at all. I'm not sure if anybody does.
Yeah, we can't keep up with you guys. That's the problem.
South Dakota producers get way in front of extension. There's so much things.
There's so many ideas.
Yeah.
One thing about it, Dan, I think, not from my perspective, I guess, but just in general, I think part of the issue that I've seen from the few people that have tried it, I've been up to the Minokan and seen theirs. The Soil Health Coalition did it. The cash crop yield isn't super stellar a lot of times. The corn yield isn't that great. So I don't know if that's why we're not seeing more wide adoption, or if it's just because it's new, but that could be part of the reason. We have to find funding to do stuff like that. And I'm not sure how we have to find somebody to fund it. That would be part of it too. But
and when it comes to labels, I mean, a lot of companies, some are changing but I mean, a lot of these chemicals are so afraid of residues in the whatever's going to be grazed in these rows that they'd rather just not even. That's why the labels are so restrictive on some of these. They don't want, like Liberty, again, it's a contact, but they don't. It's actually an organic herbicide if you want to label it that way. It comes from organic means. They found it, but they just don't want the residues from Liberty. Glufosinate is the chemical in what's grazed. So yeah, that's why the restrictions are so long. It's probably something to do with legal stuff, and it's a food chain issue. There's all kinds of stuff going on there.
Anybody else have any questions?
My mic is not on. And nobody cares. So Jim Fagan put a nice comment in there about NDSU has a great podcast on wide row corn. So anybody wants to check that out, feel free. So what do you think, Sarah? Time to end this thing?
I think it sounds like that was
Yep.
good discussion, and hopefully we got everybody's questions taken care of. And you can reach any of us at any time about these things, and we'll give you the best answer we've got. You can tell some of it's pretty alternative and new, and we learn as we go.
I think we can link people together too. We
Yep.
hear somebody that's tried something, we can link them together, and I think that's a big part of what we do is link people together and learning. So, great. Go ahead, Dan.
Anthony, one more thing, and I'd really want to thank Jared for stepping up the plate and getting this research done, because it was just 2 years ago where he said, yeah, I'll get after that. And he's done a lot of work in 2 years, and along with everybody that's been helping him. But I really want to thank you, Garrett, for doing that. But thank you, all you guys. These are good deals, you guys.
Thanks. I feel like the more research we do, the more questions we have. So I'm not sure we're solving anything. We know we know less now than we did before. But yeah, I think hopefully we are helping a little bit, get at least some direction, guidance to do.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending. Sounds like the warm spell is coming in, so next week's going to be nice, and we made it through the deep freeze. So have a great weekend. Thank you for attending today, and hope to see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.